Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into something absolutely fascinating, the evolution of the fortress. We're going to explore how the old-school, brute force engineering of medieval castles is being totally reimagined by some mind-bending future tech. We're basically taking the classic stronghold and giving it a massive blueprint upgrade.
Imagine a world where the very stones of your home could whisper warnings and actively defend themselves. Now, I know you're thinking, that sounds like pure science fiction, right? But as we'll see today, this concept is actually rooted in real, bleeding-edge engineering and advanced materials science.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the limits of stone, move into smart walls and metamaterials, rethink traditional moats and slits, dive into the digital nervous system, and finally explore the living fortress. Let's get into it.
Part 1. The limits of stone and engineering in the Middle Ages.
Look, the medieval castle was an absolute marvel of its era, no doubt about it, but it was strictly bound by basic physics. Engineers just had to rely on sheer mass. Thick walls layered with rubble and mortar were essentially a brute force solution meant to passively absorb the devastating kinetic energy from things like trebuchets. But they had huge vulnerabilities. Fire could easily turn a stone fortress into a total death trap, melting iron and engulfing the wood. Plus, you were entirely dependent on having static, geographical high ground to even see the enemy coming. It was basically the ultimate terrifying waiting game. You just had to sit there and hope your walls wouldn't crack first.
Moving right along to Part 2, smart walls and metamaterials. We're going from static barriers to dynamic defenses.
So we are completely throwing out that medieval approach of passive, brute force stone and replacing it with dynamic, intelligent systems. Enter biomimetic composite materials. Instead of simply building thicker and thicker walls, these new composites are packed with nanoscale reinforcements. They are actually capable of self-healing their own microfractures the exact moment they occur.
And the coolest part? Engineers are just lifting this design straight from nature. That's biomimetic design in a nutshell. Take the abalone shell, specifically the nacre inside it. It's unbelievably tough because of this microscopic layered structure of ceramic tiles and organic polymers. Future fortress walls are incorporating those exact same designs, which lets them absorb and dissipate energy far, far better than a solid block of stone ever could.
And this brings us to the next layer of the smart wall, embedded piezoelectric sensors. When a wall is upgraded with these, it can literally feel an attack. It doesn't just know it got hit, it instantly registers the precise moment, the exact force, and the trajectory of the impact. All this real-time data triggers localized defenses, like instantly deploying energy-absorbing gels or even firing off micro-explosives to take out a projectile before it compromises the structure.
We also have to solve that ancient, terrifying threat of fire. We're upgrading from highly vulnerable wood and stone to active fire suppression systems. Imagine a wall laced with microchannels that are constantly sniffing the atmosphere. The split second they detect the chemical signature of combustion, they automatically flood the area with fire-retardant compounds. And thanks to nanomaterials, the very molecular structure of the fortress is engineered to withstand extreme temperatures. It's totally proactive rather than reactive.
Okay, Part 3. Rethinking moats and slits. Let's look at fluid interfaces and terrain manipulation. The traditional water moat definitely served a purpose back in the day, but it was just a static, physical obstacle that you could easily bypass or bridge. Say goodbye to that. The future fortress relies on dynamic energy barriers. We're talking about subterranean sonic emitters designed to completely destabilize vehicles and disorient infantry. Using advanced geotechnical engineering, the fortress can actually manipulate the earth around it to create localized sinkholes or deploy seismic deterrents. It's wild stuff. And what about the classic arrow slit? Clever for archers, sure, but a fixed opening is always a fixed vulnerability. Instead, we have dynamic apertures. These are controlled interfaces that can fluidly seal themselves up, deploy energy shields, or launch counter-munitions. If a threat tries to target a specific aperture, the system can instantly hit back with a directed energy weapon or a localized EMP to fry their electronics. The whole concept of an opening becomes completely fluid. Which brings us to Part 4, the digital nervous system. This is the brains behind all the brawn.
Remember how those old castles desperately needed a physical hilltop to spot the enemy? Well, because we no longer need a geographical high ground, we create a virtual one. We do this using a massively distributed interconnected sensor network.
By stacking thermal imagers, LiDAR, acoustic sensors, and ground-penetrating radar, the fortress builds this flawless 360-degree real-time picture of everything happening around it.
And all of that raw, massive sensor data feeds directly into the digital nervous system, which is powered by advanced AI. This right here is where we definitively cross over from that passive waiting game of the Middle Ages into a hyperactive, interconnected fortress driven by immense computing power. Every single component is talking to each other instantly. Let's break down exactly how this AI operates, because it's fascinating. First, it detects subtle anomalies that are totally invisible to the human eye. Second, it doesn't just see the enemy, it actually predicts their intent, their vectors, and their weaponry based on movement. Third, using game theory and swarm intelligence, it simulates thousands of attack scenarios in milliseconds. And finally, step 4, it deploys preemptive defenses. It's learning from every single engagement so incredibly fast that it can neutralize threats before they even strike. When you have an incredibly powerful AI running the show, you can start directing revolutionary metamaterials. These are materials engineered at the atomic level to possess properties that just don't exist in the natural world. Theoretically, under AI control, these materials could bend light to render the entire fortress invisible. They could actively change their texture to deflect incoming hits, or even generate localized force fields to repel attackers with near-perfect kinetic efficiency.
But, as amazing as all this technology is, even with the AI, the metamaterials, the predictive modeling, we still have to ask the million-dollar question. What actually happens when an impenetrable wall is finally breached? And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the living fortress and adapting to failure.
In the future fortress, a breach is not an end, but a transition. I absolutely love this quote because it completely captures the paradigm shift here. In a medieval castle, a breached wall meant game over. It was a catastrophic failure. But today, a breach is not an end, it's just a transition. Instead of a total collapse, the fortress simply adapts by dynamically reconfiguring itself.
To pull this off, the fortress uses modular defense systems that instantly isolate any penetration. It triggers this rapid deployment of robotic barriers and internal force fields. It is perfectly willing and capable of completely sealing off or even entirely sacrificing a compromised section just to save the rest of the structure. It behaves exactly like a living organism fighting off a virus from within. Which really leaves us with this final provocative thought. We have transitioned from the brute force of static stone to active intelligence and resilience. If our fortresses can learn, adapt, and evolve exactly like living organisms, are we merely engineering walls, or are we giving birth to our own digital guardians? It's an incredible testament to human ingenuity and the boundless potential of our engineering future. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the blueprints of our world.